I used to hear this as a kid, these wives' tales about turkeys drowning themselves during thunderstorms, looking up and opening their, just crazy nonsense things. And in reality, this is a bird that is intelligent and they learn. They have defined social hierarchies where certain individuals rank higher than others, and their social system is very complex. And I think a lot of people don't know that. And our research has also clearly shown that when you hunt this bird, you change its behavior. If they survive our activity of hunting them, they change how they behave. And if you're a turkey hunter, you know this. As birds get older and older, they become almost impossible to kill.
Michael Chamberlain. We're going to get into wild turkey, not the alcohol. I know you hear that joke all the time. We're getting real wild turkey. Although we're talking the pregame and he's got this big, tall, high ceilings, extra high ceilings, grandiose window, and a lot of bucks on the wall. But he has an affinity towards anything with antlers. But let's go back let's go back in time. Find out what built you and how you got into the world of hunting. And tell us where you're from originally. She's in Georgia now. Tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, so I grew up as a suburban kid outside of Richmond, Virginia. Had a dad that was a weekend warrior, if you will. From a hunting perspective, he worked really hard, ran a business as a diesel mechanic, and about the only time we had to spend together was on Saturdays, when that was the only legal day that we could hunt in Virginia at the time. And as a father and son, so that's where my passion for hunting started, is wanting to connect with my dad.
Now, what'd you hunt with him?
Anything that would put me outside. My dad was a big deer hunter. He really liked to deer hunt, but as I got kind of consumed with being outside and hunting, if it was legal and in season, I hunted it.
So in high school, did you know what you wanted to do? Or, you couldn't imagine that you'd be able to be like a influencer or anything to what you're now. So, but what was the plan?
To be honest with you, even as a small child, I kind of saw myself as going into wildlife biology in a general sense. I met a man who was a friend of my dad's at our hunting camp, who was a wildlife biologist. And I really got interested in what he did for a living. I had no idea really where I would end up. I didn't really have a vision for where I'd end up. I just knew that I wanted to, quote unquote, do wildlife stuff. And that led me into high school, and in high school, I kind of saw myself going to college and doing wildlife, although I had no idea what that meant, and neither did my parents, much to their chagrin. And I ended up at Virginia Tech in the Fisheries and Wildlife Science program, and that was it. That pretty much pointed me in the direction of graduate school. And when I got into graduate school, that's when I was offered the opportunity to work with turkeys. And now, 30 years later, here we are.
Well, how do you work with turkey in graduate school? What does that look like? How's that journey take you?
Yeah, so in my field, when you go to graduate school, you often are conducting research on a study that's a field study, some type of field study. And in my case, the professor that hired me had 3 different studies that he had funding to conduct, and he needed graduate students to do all 3 of them. And one of them was a study on turkeys out in the boondocks of the Mississippi Delta. And I chose that one because I was a turkey hunter as a kid and thought it would be super interesting to study wild turkeys. And so I got put out in the middle of nowhere, and I was told, all right, catch turkeys and put radio transmitters on them and track them and tell us what they're doing. And from the first bird I caught, I was hooked, and have been doing that type of work ever since.
So you're probably one of the like leaders in this particular, it's very, very esoteric, it's specialized. Now, when you got into, discovering the characteristics, can you get into like what were the different types of like how is this bird different? What are those unique characteristics of turkey, wild turkeys?
I think one thing that separates turkeys from a lot of critters in general is that they're very gregarious most of the year. They want to spend time around other birds. But then when they go to reproduce, they're loners. They move away from other birds once they've bred, particularly hens, the females, and they go to nest. And then as soon as they hatch, or if they fail at nesting, they then suddenly go back to being around other birds. They're very social, and they have defined social hierarchies where certain individuals rank higher than others, and their social system is very complex. And I think a lot of people don't know that, and when they learn that, it's interesting to them because they're in some ways they're like we are. We have we have structure, I hope, in our lives, and that structure dictates how successful we are in our lives. And turkeys are very similar. They have a very defined structure as to how they interact with each other, and that structure is partially dictating how successful they are.
What's the origin of the wild turkey? Like where are they originally from?
They're endemic to North America.
Mm.
There were subspecies, as there are now, of wild turkeys. The most common being the eastern subspecies, which is where I live. Where you live, you're transitioning into the Rio Grande subspecies. But turkeys were endemic to North America and extended well down into what is now Mexico, and there's another species of turkey, the ocellated turkey, which is a different species than the wild turkey, but yeah, a North American critter.
Yeah, now I got wild turkeys on our property out here, and they're small. They're kind of even deer out here are smaller than like my wife's from Connecticut. We go to Connecticut. The deer is more robust. Where would you say what are the characteristics of the different regions of turkey and sizes and the different characteristics in the different part of the country?
Yeah, you definitely see size differences and morphological differences as you move from one subspecies to the other, and even within the subspecies. As you here in the east and southeast, even as you move from, say, where I live in Georgia up to, say, Iowa and Indiana, New York, the birds are larger as you move north. The Rio Grande subspecies out where you are, they definitely are smaller than the eastern subspecies. And then when you get out into some of the western areas of the United States, where you have, say, the Merriam subspecies, you have hybrids, right? So when we were restoring wild turkeys to parts of North America, agencies were moving different subspecies into areas where they did not historically occur. And so you have a lot of genetic mixing, right? So you have some areas where you really don't have a defined subspecies. You have more of a hybrid. And so, of course, you see all kinds of size variation in those areas as well.
People think of turkey or wild turkey. When I think of wild turkey, I think of like, something that looks more like a real bird as opposed to a big, robust, fowl, what was the original, how did they segue? How did that perfect word for this? How did it transmogrify, eventually form into the type of turkeys there are now compared to, your squirrely looking little wild turkey you would see in the wild, like the turkey, when the president of the United States chooses the turkey that's going to survive, for Thanksgiving, where do those guys come from? How did that, grow?
Yeah, I mean, basically what happened is, people took wild turkeys and domesticated them, and through time, so all of the domestic birds that you see that are commercially raised have a link back to the wild turkey.
Mhm.
And what we've done through time to create that beast that you're talking about gets the pardon every year is basically we've taken those birds and we've bred them. We have inbred them, line bred them,
Mhm.
cross bred them to get large animals with a lot of meat and a lot of body size, right? We want the biggest possible bird we can. We've bred them. They can't fly. They can no longer fly, commercially produced birds because they're so large. And we've done that intentionally so that we can produce quality meat versus, say, that gangly turkey that's running around in the woods that uses its legs to survive.
Right. On line breeding, when you breed like dogs, that basically means you're breeding like the dad, or with the daughter, or the mom with the son. The So I mean, when it comes to, do you ever research like line breeding when they do animals like that? I mean, can it be unhealthy, or I never really thought about how they, if the health, breakdown of line breeding, stock that you're eating.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't specialize in anything related to commercially produced birds, but I have done quite a bit of research trying to understand. And listeners may be aware of like the domestic variety turkeys that you see, um, like bourbon reds and Narragansetts and some of these very specialized domestic varieties that are grown for their beauty and their plumage as well as their flesh. And so I have read a good bit about those breeding practices, and in many cases, what those producers are doing is they're trying to produce plumage that's perfect, right? They're trying to crossbreed and line breed, um, to produce genetically the plumage that is stunning, that's the most appealing to your eye, as well as producing birds that are large enough to generate meat, right?
Right. Can you actually, I'm sure you can. What would you say is the taste difference? I mean, we'll get into but I'm just curious, what's the taste difference between a wild turkey and the kind of, turkey you would get, in the store?
Yeah, I mean, wild turkey, it doesn't have as nearly as much fat on it, right? So wild turkeys store fat, under their skin as do domestic birds, but the flesh is drier because it doesn't have as much fat inside and around it, so it dries out quickly
Hmm.
compared to, say, the commercial bird that you eat. I personally, and of course I'm biased, I personally love wild turkey. I love the taste of it. You just have to cook it a little differently than popping it in the oven and throwing some salt and pepper on it, and 6 hours later you take it out of the oven and it's succulent. That's not going to happen with wild turkey.
Deep fryer, maybe. That's probably in the plan.
Absolutely nothing
Yeah.
better than fried turkey nuggets. That is for sure.
Right. Yeah. Every time if you just overcook it a little bit, it's still a winner. It's just a little crispy.
Yep, that's right. That's right.
So how many, I mean, there's got to be like, I mean, I don't know, novice, I would guess there's got to be dozens, maybe hundreds of species of wild turkey in North America.
There are 5 subspecies.
Just five.
Just 5. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. You have the easterns that are found essentially in the entire eastern part of North America. Then you have the Rio Grande, which is confined to your area, Texas, Oklahoma, into southern Kansas. And then you have the Merriam subspecies, which is found in many pockets out west. Historically, was endemic to the Colorado mountain areas. You have the Osceola subspecies, which is confined to southern Florida, and then you have the Gould subspecies, which exist in very small pockets in the southwestern United States. Most Goulds live in Mexico.
Okay. Now, the turkeys that I've seen out here, they look a little aggressive. I mean, they're not Would you say the wild turkey is a little bit more of an aggressive bird than others?
Yes, and that's traced back to these social hierarchies that they have, these dominance hierarchies. What you have in these flocks of turkeys that you see is you have a dominant bird, you have a number two bird, number three bird, so on and so on and so on. And when someone gets out of line, the socially dominant birds are going to correct them. So there's constant strife, if you will, right? There's constant bickering and chasing, and hey, stay in your line. Don't cross my line. And that's why you see constant activity in turkeys. There's almost never a dull moment if you're watching a flock of birds. There's constant back and forth.
It's almost like maybe like the alpha with dogs, the hierarchy in that regard.
Yes, exactly.
So once there's like an alpha established, is like it'll get tested, but it's really that's the leader.
That's right. That's right. And in turkeys, you typically see that the dominant birds within groups remain dominant until they're dead, until they disappear from that flock. You don't see a lot of, well, I'm dominant today, and then suddenly I'm going to get kicked out of that dominant slot. You don't see that with wild turkeys.
That's interesting. So what is it in your travels with this? What are some of the more interesting, outrageous things you've seen with wild turkey?
Oh gosh. I think one of the things that strikes me from my travels is just how different turkeys are depending on where they're located. And what I mean by that is, you can go into areas of the Northeast and they're walking around someone's backyard and attacking a mailman. And then you come down here where I'm at, and if they see a vehicle drive by, they're gone. Like they take off, boom, they're running. And yet I go to areas out west every year to hunt, and some of those birds those populations on these particular properties haven't been hunted in 30 or 40 years, and they behave so differently based on how much pressure they get from human beings. In other words, if they're not hunted, they're not disturbed, they behave so fundamentally different than if they are heavily pressured like they are here where I live.
They actually have like a consciousness a level of understanding that probably we would not, the novice wouldn't think that they do.
Yeah, I mean, and I used to hear this as a kid, these wives' tales about turkeys drowning themselves during thunderstorms, looking up and opening just crazy nonsense things. And in reality, this is a bird that is intelligent, and they learn. They're very self-conscious. They're very place sensitive. They have home ranges, so they use the same areas repeatedly, and they learn those ranges. And when something's out of line in that range, they understand it. They recognize it very quickly. And our research has also clearly shown that when you hunt this bird, you change its behavior. If they survive our activity of hunting them, they change how they behave, and they recognize the risk that we place on them, and they react accordingly. And if you're a turkey hunter, you know this. As birds get older and older, they become almost impossible to kill because they survive these risks that we impose on them, and they become very difficult to hunt. And I think most serious turkey hunters relish in that, because there is a bird that's seen all the tricks, and they know how to react to those tricks. And that, I think that's one of the many reasons turkey hunting is so addictive.
Right. Well, let's do a top five. What are the top five key points to turkey hunting?
If you're asking Mike, patience. Patience is, and I can say this as someone who's been doing turkey hunting a long time, and I did not used to have patience. Sometimes you have to slow down to go fast is the analogy I use. And turkey hunting, if you're patient, and I could say number two would be persistent. stick those two words together and don't quit. Just keep plugging, keep trying. If you think you need to leave at 9 a.m., let's stay until 9:15. If you think you need to leave at 9:15, stay until 9:30. Just be persistent and patient. I think number 3 would be try to identify situations where the bird is not used to encountering hunters in that situation. Because we see very clearly that, for instance, some birds will spend their entire turkey season very close to roads, very close to areas where we park and walk through. Those birds become very difficult to harvest. On the other hand, if you can get away from the crowds and you can get into a situation where you're encountering birds that are not used to being encountered in that way, those are the birds that we see that are harvested. So if you're willing to do something out of the ordinary, don't take the same path, don't take the same approach, don't do the same thing. That seems, our data very clearly shows that translates to success. I think number 4 would be go as often as you can. You're not going to be successful sitting on a couch. Get in the woods, get out there, learn, listen, pay attention. And at number 5, I say all the time, go with a good turkey hunter. Try to find, if you're a new turkey hunter or you're a young person and you're really interested in this and you want to be successful, reach out to the National Wild Turkey Federation in your state or Turkeys for Tomorrow in your state, these organizations that could help connect you with other turkey hunters, and try to find someone that you could tag along with that's been there. And I don't know of a single turkey hunter that would not take a new hunter with them and enjoy spending time offering them perspectives about what they have a passion for. And if you can do that, your learning curve will accelerate very rapidly.
Again, people, you hear that top 5? It's just the same thing with any other. It could be a doctor, lawyer, Indian chief. It crosses over. Just, know the expert. Find an expert in your business. Be consistent. Do it every day. Get your 10,000 hours or whatever the damn hours they say that is. And all these pertain to so many other things. Not to be, it's a Zen-like thing to say, but the art of turkey hunting in life.
Yes.
Speaking of Zen, we were talking in the pregame about. I always like to ask this. What's going on in your career right now? What's going on in your life? Tell us about what's happening right now.
Yeah, career-wise, it's crazy. We have a lot of research ongoing now. I have a lot of graduate students that work with me and other colleagues and faculty members here at the University of Georgia, where I work, as well as in other institutions, where we're collaborating on a lot of work across a number of states. There's more turkey research ongoing now than any time in my career, which is encouraging. But it also speaks to the fact that we have some concerns with turkey populations in a lot of areas, and we've seen some declines in a number of regions, particularly in the Southeast and Midwest. And so there's a lot going on professionally that's good. That gets me up in the morning and keeps my brain running, and that's a positive. In life, man, just trying to soak up every day as if there won't be another one, because you never know. And try to spend as much time with my wife and my daughter, and just keep plugging and take a deep breath and enjoy life. I would be lying if I didn't say I'm sick of the heat. We're doing this podcast in July, and it is miserable here. I know it's miserable where you are, and yeah. I'm really ready for that first cold front of the fall that will tell me it's time to climb a tree and pick that bow up and get after it.
Got to do the cold plunge. I just got a cold plunge a couple months ago, and I love it. It's actually the contrast between the hot heat out here in Texas and the cold plunge. It'll do a number on you, but I hear it's it makes me feel great.
Yeah, well, I have not taken that route yet. We live on a lake, and if you go get in the lake and you're close to the shore, of course, it feels like bathwater. But if you go out in the deeper parts of the lake and do some dives, you can get down to that cold level and really get invigorated. So that's I think I'll take that versus the cold plunge for now.
That's cheaper. It's a lot easier too. You don't have to set it and wait 3 hours for it to,
That's
I like
true.
to turn mine off and turn mine on. Uh, future. You said is there like any long-term plays you got planned? Anything on the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, you may know I have a website that I maintain with the help of others called wildturkeylab.com. I have a lot of content on that website. I post a lot on social media on my socials, Wild Turkey Doc. And what I'm trying to accomplish with both of those efforts is to try to put information about turkeys out there for people to digest. That's science based, but it's easy to digest and appreciate. And I want to try to keep people thinking about turkeys year round rather than just during the spring when they're hunting. I'm also trying to create an archive for all of the work that I've done in my career and the work of other people that have information that's sound but maybe not accessible to the public. So I'll continue to ramp those efforts up moving forward. Um, I run a nonprofit foundation named in my son's honor. I do mentored hunts and archery competitions through that foundation. So I'll continue to ramp that up. We're just getting that effort started. If you're interested in that, it's austonsway.org. Do a lot of work through that, and I'm excited about rolling that forward through time. So yeah, busy, busy, busy.
Nice. Two last questions. One, are turkeys good flyers? And or it depends on the species. And two, what would you tell everybody about turkeys that they probably don't know?
First question, turkeys can fly. That's their last means of escape. They prefer to run, but if running doesn't offer them the means to escape, they can and will fly readily. What you see with turkeys is very similar to what you see with a lot of game birds. They fly short distances, right? So they hop up really quick, and they're large bodied, so they're not designed to fly long distances. They're designed to just get away from danger and then sit down. So that's how they act. And what was the second question? Something they don't know.
What do people not know about turkeys? That you surprise when you talk to people and say, yeah, what surprises them the most that they don't know usually?
I think one thing that people find really interesting about turkeys, it pertains to stuff we're learning from genetics. So, for instance, we see that within a clutch of eggs. So, let's say a turkey lays 10 eggs in her nest. Those eggs are fathered by more than one male. And those eggs come from more than one female in many cases. So what that means is that you have two turkeys laying eggs in the same nest, which is parasitism. That's like cowbirds do that. Brown-headed cowbirds do that. That is something that we didn't really know the extent of how it was occurring, but that's really interesting to me because it just speaks to how complex their mating system is. That's a big one that when I tell people, they react like you, like, wow, okay, I had no idea. Like the other thing that I think we're learning that's really interesting is that when it's time to go breed, they know who's related to them and they avoid related birds.
Wow.
When it's time to go breed and nest, they move away from relatives. they perceive a cost to being around related birds when it's time to breed. And yet the rest of the year, they hang around with their sisters, their brothers, their cousins. Just during reproduction, they perceive a cost to that, and they avoid relatives.
They are community. That whole thing with the nest thing. That's just it takes a village. It's
super interesting.
Yeah, that's different. Michael Chamberlain, thank you so much for sharing. It's a very, they say the niches are in the riches. And I think that this is just fascinating, and it's nice to know. You remind me, there's another guy out there, he does Elk 101, and he's been on the show. And I just love when somebody takes a skill set and they shine bright with it, and I think this is interesting. And tell everybody how they can find out more about you.
Yeah. So like I said, if you're interested in my work, you can go to wildturkeylab.com and you'll see everything that I've done, and not just myself. Obviously, to your point, it takes a village. So you'll see links to the many articles I've written with layman summaries of what it means, what we found, what it means, why you should care. You can see all of the social media posts that I've made, the podcast that I've done, articles that I've written is all archived there. If you're on social media and you're interested, I post every week a post on Tuesday that I call Turkey Tuesday. I post on Instagram and Twitter under Wild Turkey Doc, so Wild Turkey DOC, all one word. On Facebook, if you just search on my name, you'll find my Facebook account, and post content there. And obviously, if you wanted to communicate with me, you can find my email on the University of Georgia's website. If you just type in my name, you'll find my email, and I respond to emails and messages as I receive them. Obviously, sometimes there's a slight delay, but just depends on the time of the year. But yeah, I'd love for people to contact me, and if you're interested in my work.
All right, Michael Chamberlain, thank you so much for sharing. Great stuff.
Sure, man. It's good to join you.
Thanks for joining us. Gear up for your next adventure and head over to bolotour.com to check out the amazing Bolo Pack and their other innovative outdoor gear. Catch you next time.